The Valorian Empire had ruled the galaxy with an iron fist for 5,000 years. Their quantum detection grids were legendary, so advanced they could track a single photon across multiple star systems. Military academies throughout the galaxy taught that nothing, absolutely nothing, could penetrate Valorian space undetected. Their sensors could spot a grain of sand from light years away, analyze its composition, and predict its trajectory with mathematical precision. Yet here it was, hanging in the void, like a cosmic impossibility. The human vessel had materialized within their most secure perimeter without triggering even the faintest alarm. Not a whisper on the quantum channels, not a ripple in the gravitational sensors. It simply existed where nothing should be able to survive, let alone hide. Admiral Korth's scaled hands trembled as he stared at the tactical display, his 4 eyes struggling to process what they were seeing. The ship was unlike anything in their vast databases a nightmare made manifest in twisted metal and dark energy. Angular and predatory, its hull seemed to drink in light itself, creating a void-black silhouette against the starfield. No energy. Readings, no heat signatures, no electromagnetic emissions. It was as if the universe had carved out a piece of itself and shaped it into something that shouldn't exist. "By the ancients," he whispered, his voice cracking with a fear he hadn't felt since his first battle centuries ago. His subordinates had never heard their commanders sound so shaken. "Deploy the 4th Armada. Emergency Protocol 7. The bridge erupted into controlled chaos. Officers rushed to their stations, their clawed fingers flying across control panels as warning klaxons wailed throughout the massive flagship. The 4th Armada was the Empire's Pride 25 dreadnoughts, each one a floating fortress capable of reducing entire worlds to molten slag. They had never been deployed together except during the most desperate of circumstances. But what circumstances could be more desperate than this? It's an unknown vessel appearing from nowhere, defying every law of physics and military strategy that Valorians had perfected over millennia of conquest. Meanwhile, 300,000 kilometers away, Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, watching the alien fleet scramble like frightened insects through his tactical display. His weathered face, marked by decades of warfare and loss, remained impassive as he observed their panic. Each of those dreadnoughts was massive enough to house a small city, bristling with weapons that could sterilize entire planets under normal circumstances. His single ship wouldn't stand a chance against even one of them. But these weren't normal circumstances. Nothing about this moment was normal. "They're scared," whispered Lieutenant Amy Patterson, her fingers dancing across the sensor array with practiced precision. Her voice carried a note of satisfaction that surprised even her. "Look at their formation patterns, pure panic. Their flagship is broadcasting emergency codes on 17 different frequencies simultaneously." Jake's jaw tightened, the muscles in his neck standing out like steel cables. After 2 centuries of watching the Valorians burn human colonies, slaughter innocent families, and reduce entire worlds to ash, this moment felt like divine justice finally arriving. He had been there when they glassed New Terra. He had pulled survivors from the wreckage of Colony 7. He had held dying children in his arms while Valorian ships hung in the sky like mechanical vultures. "Good," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 buried sorrows. Fear is exactly what they should be feeling. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here was the mighty Valorian Empire, conquerors of 1,000 worlds, reduced to panic by the sight of a single human vessel, but then again they had no idea what they were truly facing. They couldn't comprehend the patient fury of a species that had been pushed to the brink of extinction, only to emerge stronger, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. Lieutenant Patterson glanced at her captain, noting the cold fire in his eyes. She had served under Morrison for 8 years, had seen him face impossible odds with unshakable calm. But today was different. Today, there was something almost biblical in his composure. The terrible piece of judgment finally arriving. "Captain," she said softly, "all systems are green. The fleet is standing by." Morrison nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving the tactical display where Valorian ships continued their frantic repositioning. 25 dreadnoughts against one human vessel. If the Valorians only knew how badly they were outgunned, would they surrender immediately? Or would their pride demand they fight to the bitter end? He suspected he was about to find out. Silence on the bridge stretched like a taut wire, broken only by the soft hum of advanced systems and the distant pulse of the ship's quantum core. Every human officer present knew they were witnessing history in the making. This wasn't just another battle, this was the moment our species had been preparing for across decades of careful planning and technological advancement. Morrison said finally, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "Open a channel to the Valorian flagship. It's time to introduce ourselves." As the communication array powered up, casting an eerie blue glow across the bridge. One question hung unspoken in the air. Would the Valorians be wise enough to listen? Or would their arrogance seal their fate? The answer would reshape the galaxy forever. Speaking of reshaping things, it's just like compound interest transforms small investments into massive fortunes over time. The human strategy in this story built power gradually until it became unstoppable. If you want to discover how this same principle can transform your life, check out my next video about the incredible power of compounding, where small actions today create extraordinary results tomorrow. The holographic display flickered too, life with an electric crackle, casting ghostly blue light across the bridge as Admiral Korath's reptilian features materialized before them. His scales gleamed like polished obsidian, and his 4 yellow eyes burned with the arrogance of 5 millennia of unchallenged dominance. The Universal Translator, a piece of technology the Valorians had stolen from a conquered species centuries ago, rendered his hissing words into crisp English. "Unknown vessel, you dare violate sacred Valorian space." His voice carried the weight of absolute authority, the tone of a being who had never been denied anything in his 1,000-year lifespan. Surrender now, or face the wrath of 1,000 suns. The threat would have been impressive if it weren't so tragically outdated. 1,000 suns? The Valorians still thought in terms of brute force and overwhelming firepower. They had never learned the subtle art of precision warfare, the kind that humans had been forced to master during their darkest hours. Captain Morrison stepped forward, his scarred face illuminated by the tactical displays surrounding him. Each scar told a story, the jagged line across his left temple from the Battle of Kepler Station, the burn marks on his neck from when he'd pulled survivors from a burning transport, the deep groove along his jawline from a Valorian energy blade that had missed killing him by mere millimeters. His face was a roadmap of human suffering, and every mark had been earned fighting these very creatures. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth ship Retribution," he said, his voice steady and controlled. "We're not here to negotiate." The simple statement hit Admiral Korath like a physical blow. Not here to negotiate. In 5,000 years of conquest, every species had eventually come to the negotiating table. Fear always won in the end. The Valorians had perfected the art of breaking their enemy's will long before the first shot was fired. Negotiate. Korath's yellow eyes bulged with rage, his membrane-covered lids blinking rapidly in a display of pure disbelief. "You are one ship against the might of the Empire. What could you possibly—" "We're here to deliver justice," Jake interrupted, his voice cold as the void between stars. The words cut through Korath's bluster like a plasma sword through tissue paper. "For every human world you've burned, for every innocent life you've taken, you have 30 seconds to prepare for judgment." The bridge of the Valorian flagship fell silent. Officers who had witnessed the destruction of entire civilizations suddenly found themselves speechless. There was something in the human captain's tone. Not anger, not hatred, but something far more terrifying. Certainty. The absolute confidence of someone who held all the cards and was about to play them. Jake's hand moved to the transmission controls. 25 seconds, Admiral." Korath's scaled throat worked frantically as he tried to process what he was hearing. This was impossible. Humans were supposed to be a broken species, scattered across the galaxy in desperate refugee fleets. They were supposed to be grateful for whatever scraps the Empire allowed them to keep. They weren't supposed to issue ultimatums to the greatest military power in galactic history. "You're insane," Korath finally managed, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and something else. Was that fear? Do you have any idea what you're facing? The Fourth Armada has never been defeated. Not once in 3,000 years of warfare. 20 seconds, Jake continued, unmoved by the alien's protestations. His scarred hand hovered over the controls, steady as a surgeon's. The countdown seemed to stretch forever. On the Valorian flagship, junior officers glanced nervously at their superiors, wondering if this was some elaborate test or psychological warfare. Surely no single ship could pose a threat to their mighty fleet. Surely this was all some desperate bluff by a dying species. Seconds. But there was no desperation in the human captain's voice. No fear, no doubt. Just the cold certainty of someone who had already won and was simply going through the motions of offering his enemy a chance to surrender. Admiral Danworth's claws clicked against his command console as he tried to think of something, anything, that would make sense of this situation. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Justice," Jake repeated. 10 seconds.
Ow.
The transmission cut with a sharp electronic snap, leaving the Valorian bridge in stunned silence. In the deadly quiet that followed, Lieutenant Patterson looked up from her console, her fingers still dancing across the quantum communication array. Her face was calm, but her eyes held the same cold fire that burned in her captain's. "Green Captain," she reported, her voice carrying across the bridge like a death knell. "The fleet is standing by." If Admiral Korath could have heard those words, he would have asked the obvious question: what fleet? The sensors showed only one human vessel, isolated and apparently suicidal, but the human captain was already turning away, his hand moving toward the weapons console with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Jake's fingers hovered over the firing controls, each button glowing with soft red light. Behind him, his crew worked with the silent precision of a symphony orchestra, each officer knowing their part in the deadly performance about to begin. The bridge hummed with barely contained energy, like a coiled spring waiting to be released. "Target acquisition complete," reported the weapons officer, his voice steady, despite the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. Morrison nodded once, his gaze fixed on the tactical display where 25 Valorian dreadnoughts hung in. Perfect formation, waiting for orders that would never come. Execute. The word hung in the air for a heartbeat, pregnant with the weight of centuries of human suffering about to be answered. Then Jake's finger descended toward the firing control. The universe held its breath. You know what's fascinating about this moment? It's not about the size of the forces. It's about the power of patience and compound preparation. Just like how small, consistent investments can grow into massive wealth over time, the humans had been building their strength day by day, year by year, until they became unstoppable. Want to learn how this same principle can transform your life? Check out my next video about the incredible power of compounding, where small actions today create extraordinary results tomorrow. Admiral Korath's fury erupted in a bone-chilling roar that echoed through his flagship's bridge like the death cry of some primordial beast. The sound was so primal, so filled with rage, that even his most hardened officers took an involuntary step backward. His scaled chest heaved with each breath, and his 4 yellow eyes blazed with the kind of hatred that had fueled 5,000 years of galactic conquest. The arrogance of these mammals was beyond comprehension. How dare they? How dare a single vessel from a broken, scattered species issue ultimatums to the mighty Valorian Empire? It was like a mouse threatening a dragon. And Korath would make sure the entire galaxy witnessed what happened to those who dared challenge Valorian supremacy. "All ships, open fire," he bellowed, his voice carrying across the fleet's communication channels with the authority of absolute command. "Vaporize that insolent vessel. I want nothing left but cosmic dust." The response was immediate and devastating. 25 dreadnoughts, each one a monument to Valorian military engineering, unleashed their fury simultaneously. The combined firepower of the Fourth Armada erupted across space in a display of destruction that defied imagination. Antimatter? Torpedoes streaked through the void like falling stars, their containment fields barely holding back forces that could crack planets. Plasma cannons discharged torrents of superheated matter hot enough to melt starship hulls in milliseconds. Gravitational disruptors weapons so powerful they had literally torn apart entire star systems, warped space itself around their target. The energy discharge was visible from 3 solar systems away, a brilliant nova of artificial light that painted the void in shades of violent death. Space itself seemed to scream as fundamental forces clashed in ways nature never intended. Any normal vessel caught in that hellstorm would have been reduced to its component atoms in the first nanosecond. But as the blinding light faded and the sensors cleared, the impossible became reality. The human ship remained, untouched, unmoved. Not even a scorch mark marred its dark hull. Impossible, Korath breathed, his voice hollow with disbelief. His massive frame seemed to deflate as the implications hit him. Nothing survives that level. He never finished the sentence. The human vessel moved, and when it did, every law of physics that the Valorians understood simply ceased to matter. This wasn't the gradual acceleration of normal ships, with their fusion drives and reaction mass. This was an instantaneous displacement that violated everything they knew about space and time. One moment the vessel was there, hanging motionless, in the void like a black specter. The next, it was weaving through his fleet like a vengeful ghost, moving with impossible grace between dreadnoughts. It should have been able to track and destroy anything in known space. The first dreadnought, Vest Dominator, veteran of 100 campaigns, didn't explode. It didn't burn. It didn't even break apart. It simply ceased to exist. No wreckage, no debris field, no energy signature to mark its passing. One moment it was there, a massive instrument of war bristling with weapons and shields. The next, there. It was only empty space, as if reality itself had decided the ship never existed in the first place. Defensive maneuvers, Korath screamed, his voice cracking with panic he hadn't felt since his first battle centuries ago. But his words were lost in the chaos erupting across his bridge. Officers shouted contradictory orders. Alarms wailed from every station. The tactical display flickered with impossible readings as another dreadnought simply vanished from existence. The human ship danced between his vessels like death incarnate. And with each impossibly brief contact, dreadnought vanished into oblivion. The VES Conqueror, pride of the 3rd Battle Group, gone. The VES Annihilator, with its crew of 3,000, erased from reality. The VES Devastator, whose plasma batteries had reduced entire worlds to slag, simply ceased. It was like watching a predator toy with its prey, except the predator was somehow everywhere at once, and the prey were the most powerful warships in galactic history. On the bridge of the Retribution, Lieutenant Amy Patterson's fingers flew across her console with practiced precision. Her voice cut through the controlled chaos of human efficiency like a blade through silk. Target acquired. Firing solution locked. The contrast was stark. While the Valorian flagship descended into panic, the human bridge hummed with quiet professionalism. No shouting, no confusion, just the deadly calm of a crew that had trained for this moment their entire lives. Each officer knew their role, each system responded with mechanical precision, and at the center of it all stood Captain Jake Morrison. Unmoved by the destruction unfolding around them, "Fire," he commanded. His voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins like liquid lightning. The word carried the weight of 2 centuries of human suffering, of burned colonies and murdered children, of a species pushed to the brink of extinction only to emerge stronger and more dangerous than ever before. It was a single syllable that would reshape the galaxy. But here's the thing about ultimate power. It's not about having the biggest weapon or the most ships. It's about preparation, patience, and the compound effect of countless small advantages building over time. The Valorians had focused on brute force. The humans had learned something far more valuable: the power of strategic thinking, compounded over decades. What happened next would prove that sometimes the most devastating force in the universe isn't raw power, it's intelligence applied consistently over time. And if you want to discover how the same principle of compound growth can transform your own life, building small advantages into massive success. Check out my next video about the incredible power of compounding. Because just like the humans in this story, your greatest victories often come from the patient accumulation of small wins over time. Within 10 minutes, the pride of the Valorian Empire was reduced to 4 surviving ships, including Korith's flagship, 10 minutes. That's how long it took to dismantle a fleet that had conquered half the galaxy. The remaining vessels hung in space like wounded animals, their crews paralyzed by the impossibility of what they had just witnessed. The human vessel had returned to its original position with the same impossible grace it had displayed during the slaughter. It sat there, patient as eternity itself, as if the systematic destruction of 21 dreadnoughts had been nothing more than a casual exercise. No victory celebration, no taunting transmissions, no dramatic posturing. Just cold, mechanical efficiency that was somehow more terrifying than any display of emotion could have been. The communication channel crackled to life with that familiar electronic buzz, and Captain Morrison's face appeared again on the holographic display. But now Admiral Korith could see something that made his blood freeze in his veins. Dozens of other human officers behind him, their faces grim with purpose. They weren't celebrating either. They looked like surgeons who had just completed a necessary but distasteful operation. Admiral Morrison said calmly, his voice carrying the same measured tone he might use to discuss the weather. I trust that demonstration was educational. You're probably wondering how we accomplished this. Educational. Korith's 4 eyes bulged as he processed the word. Educational. One of the most powerful warships in galactic history had been erased from existence, and this human called it educational. The casual dismissal of such devastating power was perhaps more unsettling than the power itself. Korith's vocal cords had seized completely. He could only stare in mounting horror at the human captain's scarred face, searching for some sign of madness. Some indication that this was all an elaborate hallucination brought on by combat stress, but Morrison's eyes held only the cold clarity. Of absolute certainty, the answer is patience, Morrison continued. That somehow that single word carried more weight than all the threats and ultimatums that had preceded it. For 3 centuries, we've been watching your empire expand, studying your technology, mapping your weaknesses. Did you really think a species that survived the void between galaxies would remain defenseless forever? 3 centuries? The number hit Korith like a physical blow, 300 years of planning, of watching, of waiting. While the Valorians had grown complacent in their dominance, the humans had been preparing for this exact moment. Every battle, every conquest, every display of Valorian power had been observed, analyzed and cataloged by minds that had learned to think in terms of generations rather than decades. The display behind, Morrison shifted with fluid precision, showing detailed star charts of Valorian space that made Korith's blood turn to ice. Every military installation was marked with surgical precision. Every fleet position was documented down to the last patrol route. Every strategic asset, from the smallest outposts to the massive fortress worlds, glowed with a kind of detailed intelligence that should have been impossible to gather. We know everything about you, Admiral, Morrison said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone stating an indisputable fact. Your ship designs, your quantum frequencies, your political structure, your supply lines, your manufacturing capabilities. We know which officers are loyal and which are corrupt. We know your fleet rotations, your communication protocols, your emergency procedures. We've been preparing for this reckoning since the day you first fired on human colonies.
Ow.
Scope of it was staggering. This wasn't just military intelligence. This was a complete dissection of an entire civilization, performed with the patience of a species that had learned to think in geological time. How many human agents had died gathering this information? How many had lived entire lifetimes as deep cover operatives within Valorian society? Lieutenant Patterson stepped forward, her young face carrying the same cold professionalism as her captain. Captain, the other fleets are reporting in. All primary targets are secured. Other fleets. Korith's mind reeled as the implications hit him. This wasn't a single ship on a suicide mission. This was a coordinated assault on a scale that boggled the imagination. How many human vessels were out there, moving through Valorian space like ghosts, striking at targets that had been selected decades ago? Morrison nodded with the casual efficiency of someone checking items off a grocery list. Admiral, meet Lieutenant Amy Patterson, my tactical officer. She's been coordinating what you might call a comprehensive operation. The euphemism would have been laughable if it weren't so terrifying. This was the systematic decapitation of an entire empire, executed with the precision of a chess grandmaster who had been planning his moves for centuries. You see, Admiral, Morrison continued, his tone almost conversational now, humans have a particular talent for learning from our mistakes. When you scattered us across the galaxy, you thought you were breaking us. Instead, you gave us the greatest gift possible: perspective. We learned to see the bigger picture, to think beyond the immediate battle. The human captain gestured to the tactical display. The red indicators were appearing across Valorian space like a spreading infection. While you were focused on ruling through fear and brute force, we were building something far more dangerous, a network of patience and preparation that spans the entire galaxy. Patterson's console chimed softly, and she glanced at the readout with the calm efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this moment countless times. Captain, all secondary objectives are complete. The Valorian command structure is officially decapitated. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Command structure decapitated. In the span of minutes, the entire leadership of the Valorian Empire had been eliminated with surgical precision. Not just the military commanders, but the political leaders, the industrial magnates, the bureaucrats who made the machine of empire function. Morrison turned back to Korath, and for the first time, something that might have been sympathy flickered in his eyes. I want you to understand something, Admiral. This isn't about revenge, though we certainly have reasons for that. This is about ensuring that what happened to humanity never happens to another species again. The revelation was complete, but the true horror was just beginning to dawn on Korath. The humans hadn't just defeated the Valorian Empire, they had replaced it entirely. All while maintaining the illusion that they were still the scattered refugees they had been centuries ago. You know what's remarkable about this? It's the same principle that builds wealth over time: compound interest. The humans understood that small, consistent actions, compounded over centuries, create unstoppable momentum. Want to learn how this same principle can transform your life? Check out my next video about the incredible power of compounding, where I'll show you how small daily investments in yourself can create extraordinary results that seem impossible. Today, 2 hours later, Admiral Korath found himself in the detention bay of the human vessel, along with the surviving officers of his fleet. The transition from commanding the most powerful armada in galactic history to being a prisoner had happened so quickly that his mind still struggled to process it. One moment he had been the supreme military authority of a 5,000-year-old empire, the next he was standing in shackles, surrounded by the wreckage of everything he had believed about Valorian superiority. The space around him was impossibly vast, larger than his flagship's main hangar despite the ship's deceptively modest exterior dimensions. The walls stretched upward into darkness, creating the illusion of standing in a cathedral built for giants. But this wasn't a place of worship. It was a monument to human engineering that defied everything the Valorians thought they knew about spatial physics. Captain Morrison stood before them, no longer alone. Around the chamber, other human officers materialized from what appeared to be empty air, their forms slowly becoming solid as advanced stealth technology disengaged. The effect was unsettling, like watching ghosts become flesh, or perhaps the reverse. Each officer that appeared carried themselves with the same calm professionalism that had characterized Morrison. Throughout this entire nightmare, the stealth technology made their earlier invisibility seem primitive by comparison. These weren't just cloaking devices. They were reality manipulators that could bend space and time around a person, making them effectively invisible to any known sensor technology. How long had humans been walking among Valorian crews, listening to their conversations, studying their weaknesses, reporting back to command structures that existed in the shadows? The Valorian Empire is hereby dissolved, Morrison announced, his voice echoing through the chamber with the authority of inevitability. The words carried the weight of cosmic judgment, each syllable precisely chosen to convey the finality of what was happening. Your territories will be administered by the human colonial authority until your species demonstrates the capacity for peaceful coexistence. The casual way he delivered the sentence is if he were announcing a change in duty schedules rather than the end of a galactic civilization somehow made it even more terrifying. There was no gloating, no triumph, no emotional satisfaction. Just the cold efficiency of administrators implementing a long-planned policy change. "This is madness," Korath managed through his terror, his voice cracking like that of a much younger officer facing his first battle. "Our empire spans 2,000 worlds? You cannot possibly, we already have." Morrison gestured to the holographic displays that suddenly materialized around them, filling the vast chamber with three-dimensional maps of Valorian space. The effect was breathtaking and horrifying. Every world, every system, every strategic position floating in miniature perfection around the captive officers. But it was what the displays showed that truly broke Korath's spirit. Across Valorian space, human vessels were appearing above every major world, not dozens or hundreds, but thousands, an entire armada that had somehow remained hidden until this moment. Each ship was a testament to human patience and planning, positioned with surgical precision to maximize strategic advantage. The scope of the operation was staggering. This wasn't just a military conquest, it was the revelation of a shadow infrastructure that had been growing like a virus through Valorian space for centuries. Every supply depot, every communication relay, every administrative center was already under human control, their crews having been replaced so gradually that nobody had noticed the transition. Lieutenant Patterson stepped forward, her young face carrying an expression of cold satisfaction that would have been disturbing on anyone else. But after what the Valorians had done to human colonies, after the centuries of systematic genocide and oppression, her satisfaction seemed almost restrained. Every military installation, every orbital platform, every defense griddled under human control as of 6 minutes ago. She reported with the precision of someone reading from a checklist. "The transition has been remarkably smooth, sir. Valorian personnel are still unaware that command has changed hands." 6 minutes. The entire Valorian Empire had been conquered in 6 minutes, and most of its citizens didn't even know it had happened. The elegance of the operation was almost artistic in its perfection, like a master painter creating a masterpiece with a single brushstroke. "The age of galactic tyranny is over," Admiral Morrison continued, his tone carrying the weight of historical inevitability. "Humanity has seen what happens when aggressive species are left unchecked. We won't make that mistake again." The Promisor threat hung in the air like a sword. The humans weren't just conquering the Valorian Empire. They were positioning themselves as the galaxy's new guardians. The species that would prevent any future civilization from following the Valorian path of conquest and genocide. As Korath watched his empire crumble in real time through the holographic displays, he realized the truth that would haunt him forever. They had never been the apex predators of the galaxy. They had simply been allowed to believe they were, like children playing with toys, while the adults watched from the shadows. The Valorians had been powerful, yes, but they had been operating within parameters set by beings who understood war on a level they could barely comprehend. The Void had indeed given birth to something terrible, not just a ship, but an entire species that had learned to wage war with the patience of eternity and the precision of gods. Where the Valorians had relied on brute force and fear, the humans had mastered the art of strategic patience, building their victory one small piece at a time over the course of centuries. "Captain Jake." Morrison turned to Lieutenant Amy Patterson, his expression softening for the first time since this entire operation had begun. For just a moment, the mask of command slipped, revealing the man beneath someone who had carried the weight of his species, suffering for decades, and was finally able to set it down. "Signaled the colonies, Amy," he said quietly, his voice carrying a warmth that had been absent throughout the confrontation. "Tell them they're free." Patterson's fingers flew across her console, sending the message that would change everything for the scattered human settlements across the galaxy. After centuries of living in fear of hiding in the shadows, of watching their children grow up as refugees, humanity could finally come home. Yes, sir, it's finally over. The human officer smiled grimly, but his eyes held depths that suggested this victory was just the beginning of something much larger. No, Lieutenant, it's just beginning. The words carried a promise that would reshape the galaxy forever. The age of human hiding was over. The age of human guardianship had begun. You know what's incredible about this story? It perfectly demonstrates the power of compound growth, how small, consistent actions over time can create results that seem impossible. The humans didn't win through brute force. They won through patient accumulation of advantages over centuries. If you want to learn how this same principle can transform your life, building small daily habits into extraordinary success, check out my next video about the incredible power of compounding. Because just like the humans in this story, your greatest victories often come from the steady accumulation of small wins over time.